Reto, welcome to the Human Endurance Podcast. It's such an honor to have you on.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, very welcome. So let's start with the basics. So we know that you are a certified endurance coach and you work with elite athletes, cycling, triathlon. Can you introduce yourself to the listeners? What is it that you do? What is your specialization? Tell us.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm working, as you said, with professional, mainly triathletes, as well with few age group athletes. I used to work in a lab in Zurich, in a performance lab, the last 10 years, but I got more into coaching. So my job was bringing the data from the lab into real life performance. And before that, I was first grew up as a cyclist myself. Unfortunately, I wasn't good enough to make money for it, so I thought it's better maybe invest in other things. And after that, I switched into triathlon as an age grouper, but I was on a good level, but never good enough to also make some money in triathlon, which then I decided I focus more on the business side, and that makes a lot of fun, and enjoying the time.
And what is it that you love about coaching and it moved you into this field?
It's to work together with the athletes. It's achieving a goal, maybe also a dream from some athletes, and joining those athletes on their way. That gives me huge satisfaction.
And how would you describe your coaching approach in general?
Oh, that's difficult. It's not a general approach. It's very human driven. My job is to understand the person behind the athlete, how they work, how their strength and weakness profile looks like, and then finding together with them the right intervention to have success, whatever in the end of the day success means.
Mm-hmm. Can you walk us through an example? So, for example, thinking of two athletes that you coach today, Anne Reischmann and Sara Svensk. They're both elite level triathletes, right? Can you explain how different they are in terms of athletes and how do you approach coaching them?
Yeah, like Sara Svensk and Anne Reischmann, like, as you said, like two top professional athletes, but as a human, completely different. So we have different approaches. They have a different background. Anne, as an example, she has a track and field background, which means she has other experience in coming from running, but also maybe mentally other challenges. As an example, as a track and field athlete, you do a lot of sessions on the track, of course. And we saw that this was now in her case very, very much on her head, or in her head, to be very specific in track sessions. So a lot of like older things came up, so we then switched those sessions back from the track to other places, just not to make the old process coming up again.
Can you give some examples? What were some old processes she had in mind?
I think like a typical session they do on the track is like 10 time 800, and she was to 10 time 400, and she was so used into those sessions from her time in the US, which mentally always like an old story came up in her mind. We then decided that this pressure was we didn't want to have the pressure in this set because it was just one of maybe 3 sets per day. So we switched that from the track back to the road without having specific lap time. Just maybe transferred it into heart rate or maybe lactate numbers or whatever, so we could switch the mental aspect from that.
She was getting like very focused on the time and hitting those seconds. The show is
absolutely, which sometimes can be positive, but in this case was more like of a performance reducer. So this is a typical example for somebody having a different backgrounds. You have to teach different, even if it makes sense to do this session maybe on the track, but in this case we had to switch it, not every time but sometimes. And and of course Sarah, she's a complete different athlete. She has no background in running or in cycling or in swimming, but she's a doctor, and that makes it also interesting. It makes it very interesting to talk with her about several topics where she has a huge experience and she has a clear opinion on that. And so complete different approach to do specific things then.
Well, can you share a bit more how you supported Sarah in her success? I mean, she just in Kona, she finished 8th place and had one of the few sub 3-hour marathons off the bike, obviously. Can you share a bit more how you approach training with her, coming from no specific background in elite sports?
Well, of course, this race wasn't just like her first race. She had like several years of very high performance results in triathlon. But this build-up was kind of special because she had a foot injury in summer. And when you want to be in early October in Hawaii on your peak performance, a foot injury in July is not what you're really looking for, mentally, but also physically. And her build-up into Hawaii was special because I would say on average we had about 4 hours of running per week, which is not that much. And from the 4 hours, it was about 50% on the liver system, which is reducing the impacts. And that's also normally not what the runners are looking for, right? On the treadmill. It means treadmill. But we had some experience in the build-up with that. And since she had a very solid aerobic foundation from cycling, she was able to transfer that. She has by nature a good running economy. And in the end, yeah, she ended up with the third or the fourth fastest running split, and this transfer worked well for her. So there are always different approaches how you can reach a goal.
And that's quite amazing, because I think the general consensus, or like the straightforward thinking would be, wow, to get fourth best time in the marathon in Kona, you'd have to be to peak running shape, like train crazy amounts of volume. I feel like that's the general consensus, and she comes from an injury, so it really shows how if you really individualize and think of alternative ways, it can work.
And I think if you have this kind of challenges, you have to find solutions, right?
Yeah.
And if you need to find solutions, you learn a lot what is also possible, what is working other ways. And yeah, that's also for all the listeners. You don't just have to follow the traditional way. There are other ways where you can, or how you can achieve a goal. Absolutely. Yeah.
And how does confidence play into that? Because one thing is that you train maybe more the bike and you know it translates, but then the other thing is knowing that your volume is low and you're going to run the marathon off the bike.
I think you have to be mentally very strong, and of course you need this at least one-time experience where it played out positively. And when it played out once positively, you're gonna believe in, hey, it works, so it works for you or for me. But Sarah had that in the past where she had no other possibilities, and she believed in it, and it also worked out in the past. So then it was just not just we do it again. You maybe adapted a little bit to the demands of Kona. But yeah, I agree. You need this one-time satisfaction that an alternative way is working. And then probably for you, it's not a big game anymore. And for others, it's a huge question mark.
Yeah. I'm pretty amazed, because I would just think about myself, I'm obviously not an athlete of this caliber, but I would freak out if I would see my record mileage and it's 4 hours. So that means
40, 50,
yeah,
maybe 60. That's not much, but yeah, it just as you said, like probably all the average age groups who are going to Hawaii are somewhere there. And as a pro, you probably also think that you need a little bit more of running volume, but it just shows that it's possibly the other way. And she's not the only single person who has this approach. We know from other men. We talked about that before, right? Who are doing the same, and they have great running performance. So at least in triathlon, in long distance triathlon, it seems to work. Yeah.
And you were mentioning before that Sarah obviously has a huge aerobic base, and you're also and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're more on or focusing a lot on building an aerobic base versus maybe doing too much high intensity. Can you elaborate a bit on your approach there?
It's funny, if you would talk to my athletes, they will probably not agree with that. They're always complaining about intensity. No, not complaining, but yes, I know what you mean. Look, in the end, long distance triathlon, mid distance, but also Olympic, is a very aerobic demanding sport. So baseline, the basics is having a very solid aerobic system. And there are different ways to build that up, right? But this is always the foundation. And based off that, you can build up the intensity. So if then, like an injury happened like with Sarah, and you have a very solid foundation, this foundation is also solid in a couple of weeks ago, which you then can build up. And this is just, it's not rocket science. And people always try to shorten the way to have success. But in endurance sport, it's about the work from year to year being consistent, and there is no shortcut. But it's also good if you're coming from a running background in endurance into this sport, we can have success with your solid foundation, or from cycling, or from other sports, right? Where they have the same approach.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And it reads that away from elite triathlon for a moment and just think of like your average person, like a beginner who might be getting into triathlon now. Maybe let's say they actually didn't do a lot of sports growing up, but they're getting into triathlon. What would be your recommendation with regards to how to balance volume and intensity? Like, when does it make sense for a beginner to start adding intensity to the training? When does it not make sense?
It's also here, first you have to build the foundation. It doesn't mean that you can add some intensity, but it shouldn't be 90-10, right? Maybe somehow the opposite, maybe more or less, but the huge workout is just solid, basic work, and that can be pretty boring, as we know who grew up in this sport, but it also just gives you this kind of foundation, which then you can transfer into solid performance, right? And there is really no shortcut, and we're living in times where we all try to shorten the way to success, but here there is no way to shorten. Maybe we have other things how we can implement nutrition, the recovery, but still the hours have to be done somehow, right? There is no shortcut.
Yeah.
Can you maybe to the listeners take an example of one of your athletes and share a bit how you would structure that training week, let's say in a build phase of an athlete?
Well, for us normally, if you have this foundation, like this longer over year work, then for us the last 8 to 10 weeks going into a race are crucial, right? You can be maybe lazy in the weeks before, or we need to make some adjustment, but if you can build up the last 8 to 10 weeks into a big race, we call it the A race, and we have some different cycles we're going through, again based on the strength and weakness profile of an athlete, and there we have this different tasks to do within the 3 disciplines, or even 4 disciplines if you call the nutrition in, or you can also call the strength part, which is also a huge field we can talk about. So there's a lot of work to do, and then we go through a specific cycle for what we then need for the A race, for the demands of this A race. And as closer we get to the race, as more specific we get. So we want to have no surprises. This is for aerodynamics on the bike, for nutrition on the run, for the material, but also for intensity, right? So everything as closer to the race, being more and more specific. Before we're looking for intensity, but always within an uncontrolled environment, which means we're not looking for this one unique exercise which doesn't really exist. We want to keep going every day, having a consistent workload, kind of a high workload, because oxygen uptakes counts, of course. So we just have to be consistent from day to day. And with age group, we're doing more or less the same, but on a different level. And of course, there we have other things playing into it, like family, like work, other demands where you have to handle. But those are the limiting factors for them, and we have to count out that. That's a very rough idea how we go into the last 8 to 10 weeks into a race of an athlete.
And just to dive into what you brought up, so for age groupers, there's usually a lot more limiting factors because you have other things going on in life. How do you as a coach try to track or monitor that? Like, have you found any ways? Because I coach some athletes as well, beginners, but I find it hard to know exactly how they're doing, like really figure out how stressed are they, like how is work going, are they sleeping well? I find it really difficult to keep track of everything. Have you found any good ways to do that?
Relationship to an athlete. To build up a relationship like you have a relationship with your partner. The first phase is always learning each other. It's interesting, but it's also demanding, right? If you take over a new athlete, especially a pro athlete, that's so much work going into past data, but also injury story and so on. And then you get into some kind of rhythm, but then you have to adapt, right? And for the professional athletes, normally you have the whole day for free to train. But of course, that's not the whole truth. They have also appointments and family stuff. Yeah. But for the age groupers, you need to have a communication line where they really tell you what their day looks like. And sometimes you also have their travel schedule. You know in which hotel they're sleeping when they travel for business and what the equipment looks like, so you can be specific how the demands of the families are looking like. But for that, you need to have a very open communication, which then takes, of course, time. And if the open communication grows, I think you as a coach with your athlete, you can get better and better.
Communication is always the answer. Every relationship.
In any relationship. I would like to change topic a little bit and talk a bit more about body composition. It's a broad term, and I would actually like you to explain what actually means body composition and how and why it's important in endurance sports.
Okay, body composition mainly means the weight of your body split it down into fat mass, bone density, and muscle, which is not 100% correct because muscles or lean body mass means you have the bones, you have the muscles, you have the water, and you have the organs and the blood. But generally speaking, it's the muscle mass, it's the bone mass, and it's the fat mass.
So it's fats and everything else, I guess.
No, I would really say fat.
Okay.
Muscle, which includes water, blood, and the organs, and bones. And we're looking at those numbers individually with the athletes, and not only with high-performance athletes, also with normal athletes, maybe train 10 hours a week to understand how the body reacts on the working and on the environment, who has an impact on your body composition. And also to understand how the body reacts on the workload. What we don't like to see is a huge decrease on fat, or of course not high decrease on muscle mass. Depends on how your history looks like. And of course we want to measure bone density, especially within female athletes. We don't want to see this number getting lower, or if the athlete, sometimes also male athlete, also have a lower bone density number. So they're already in an area which can be kind of critical. And knowing that, we can also adapt it into training when it comes to nutrition, but also into we can make, if somebody has weak bone numbers, we can add more specific strength training We can add jump sessions or whatever, just to try to at least hold the level of your bone density and not getting lower and then getting into stress fractures and other things. We normally want to see, or I want to understand for my athletes, having the on and the off season data. We don't have to track that every month, which makes no sense at all, but just have on and off data. And it's funny with the most athletes, especially female athletes, when you start with that, they're very concerned about their body weight. Always thinking, I can be lean or whatever it means. Less fat or what? Yeah, and then you're getting specific into the topic, and then already the questions popping up.
I'm actually curious because muscles that are way heavier than fat. And you were alluding a bit that you don't also want the muscles to get too big, right? So
for endurance sport, we want to be strong, but we don't want to increase the muscle mass.
Mm-hmm. So what would be, generally speaking, an ideal body composition off season versus a peak phase right before a race?
You can't say that in general because some athletes, they are super consistent, and some of them they maybe change 1 or 2 kilograms within fat mass, but lean body mass, or at least the muscle mass, stays the same. But beside that, we're also looking at muscular disbalances. As an example, in the legs or in the upper body, when it comes to swimming, and you have muscular disbalances in your arms. In swimming, in the pool, this is not an issue. But when you go to open water swimming, you may, based on your breathing, you can drift up to the right and the left side. This is something we can address in strength training, or in running, but also in biking. If you have different muscle mass in your legs, this can have a huge impact on hips, on performance, and then on injuries. So we see that before it gets a problem, and with the physio, we try to adapt it to a level where we're not getting into injury later on when the workload is really kicking in.
Super interesting. It explains my not so straight and maybe other problems.
Also, we can look at visceral fat.
Yeah.
Visceral fat normally correlates with the quality of your nutrition. It's a huge difference if we talk about athletes or just regular people. And with athletes, high performance athletes, you can see that sometimes visceral fat is increasing during the season because they have to consume so much, let's call it energy, the gels and all that. So it's not a healthy nutrition anymore if you have to consume 4,000, 5,000 calories a day for several weeks, which then correlates with an increasing visceral fat, which a normal human, we don't want to see if you have a healthy nutrition.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually, because I'm also, I've done body composition tests, and obviously I'm always happy to see when my visceral fat is low because it shouldn't be high, but I didn't know that actually there are athletes, top former athletes, that it's increasing because they have to consume that much of those artificial products.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, the product you're consuming on a 70.3 on Ironman or within the last 8 weeks, they're not healthy at all, right? Or a big
It's just
part
sugar.
It's just sugar, but that's what you need.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not able to bring in the workload from the calorie side. And if you're not doing that, you're starting to face red ad syndrome. I think you did a podcast on that.
Yeah.
So the listeners can jump onto that one. And then it's not about healthy nutrition anymore. Then it's just bringing in the carbs. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. And then you start to reducing the workload. And by reducing the workload, normally you drop the performance.
Yeah, it's such a, for me, it's always been a challenging topic personally. I think, well, I know now for a fact that I've underfueled most of my career, let's say. I never really had a career. I read in college, but yes, it wasn't a career, but I found out the last 2 years through having 2 injuries, bone injuries, that probably wasn't eating enough. But I got lost, I think, in what I was reading. And also, I think there's a lot of discussions around, should you be eating that many carbs? Also alluding to this fact that maybe the carbs are needed for performance, but is this good for your longevity? And I think I got lost somewhere and then started underfueling. How do you deal that with your elite athletes? Like, what is your general thinking around carbs during sessions? Like, are you trying to push as much as possible for their performance, or is there another way? Like, how should we think about that?
So I don't like the trend right now where it's extremely on the high carb side, because we have no evidence that when it comes to fueling, more than 90 to 120 grams per hour is working. We just don't have any evidence. We know that 90 to 120 grams with the glucose and the fructose transporter, they're working more or less, depends on your body weight. So a 50 kilogram female probably doesn't need the same amount of carbs like a 80 kilogram man, which people sometimes make no difference, right?
Right, yeah.
So we know that, but we don't know what happened after that. And it's just not true that the better, the more is the better. And we also don't know, we can measure in the lab exactly what you burn at a specific intensity on the bike or on the run, no problem. But we can tell you that very easily. But what we don't know is when you consume 100 grams of carb, how much of those carb is your body possible to absorb? So how much of those carb can deliver into the cellular system in the end, where it gets transferred to performance, frankly speaking. And so maybe you bring in 100 per hours, but your body only tolerates 60. So what happened with the rest? We're just starting understanding that. What's the exact numbers? And this is very different from person to person.
And you cannot measure this on the lab? The absorption.
You can, but it's very, very expensive, and it's very, very complicated. Now, this is the next probably big thing we started into looking at. Is your body really able to absorb? And then we get in closer to that, because only bringing in the carbs doesn't mean you're absorbing it. And if you're going to the toy, probably
You're not that's definitely a no.
it's definitely a no. So far it's more or less try and error, right?
Yeah.
And so the more is for sure not the better. And I'm not a big fan of this high carb process. But on the other side, I also don't like the low carb process at all, especially if you training quite a high volume. This can be super dangerous at all.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, because there are also like two camps, the high carb and the low carb, and I'm curious to understand a bit more from you on fat burning and what your approaches are like, because generally you can say that if you do low intensity, you need less carbs, you can rely more on your fat reserves. What is your approach in how much can you train your fat adaptation versus then when do you have to go to
The carbs.
how do you work with your athletes on that topic?
So what you're saying is absolutely true. If you're going low on carbs and low in intensity, it's a stress for your body, and it works directly into your fat oxidation, right? This is one part of the story. The other part of the story, that this is a huge stress also, and that it can have several negative effects. But here it really depends on what is your background. If you're an average human who does 3 times a week sports, maybe go 30 minutes for an easy walk or jog in the morning, this is completely fine. If you're doing that, maybe fasted or low carb, no problem. And maybe have like 2 stress sessions a day, totally fine. And I'm not saying that in any negative way. Big respect for everyone who does that. But if you have 20, 25, maybe 30 hours per week, maybe you have a family, maybe you have a job or 2 jobs, you're permanently under stress. This can hit your body completely different than for the other person we're talking about. And therefore, we are super careful with sessions we're not fueling correctly. In fact, there are almost no session we are not fueling correctly. Fueling correctly, saying fueling the right amount for the right intensity we're doing it and for the right demand of a session. If you're doing 1 session a day, you may need a different fueling pre-post than if you do 3 sessions a day. If you had a proper meal the night before and you go for a 1-hour easy jog, you may fuel different than if you were not able because you had called until 11 o'clock, no chance to. So this all comes into that topic, and I think you have to make a difference on those things and don't just have a general opinion saying this is good and this.
And again, going to really the individual situation of an athlete. Let's take Sara Svensk again as an example. So she's obviously training, I assume, 25 to 30 hours at her max. Maybe since she's not running that much, a bit less. But how would she fuel around her sessions? Let's say she does an easy run, and then maybe let's take a VO to max session. How would you prescribe her fueling?
Sarah, she's an athlete. She tolerates quite a lot of volume, and she tolerates it well. And but we are a little bit careful on very high intensity session. So also for her, I think she did quite a good learning curve in the last couple of years. She's looking more and more carefully into nutrition since, she also had issues with her body, and she does much better loading. Not only carbs, but also on the fatty acids, but also on the protein side, looking for a good protein synthesis. So high volume work is probably, if you look at the energy consumption, is even more challenging than one single high intensity session. And if we do like 3-4 days, on average 5 to 6 hours, this is super challenging, and this is also not where only she has some struggles, but also other athletes, professionals and age group athletes on a lower volume. They really struggle to prepare it, consume it, and to adapt it on a daily basis for several days or on a training camp for 3 weeks.
To actually eat enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you do a high intensity session, you're burning a rate. If you have high intensity or your adaptation is not that high, that makes sense, right? If you have high intensity, you cannot bring in a lot of carbs. So burning rates are higher if the intensity is a little bit lower and the duration starts to increase. So having those long days on the bike for several days, several weeks, maybe together with altitude, maybe together with heat, combined with running, this is more challenging to fuel it pre, during, and post correctly. Right. And that's a big challenge if you don't have your own cook.
Right. And if you underfuel one day and you have back-to-back days that are so long, then it just kind of all adds up, right?
The negative process already starts, and then we're coming back to the open communication, because even with the pro, mostly we're doing remote coaching, and sometimes they let you know, I did a mistake about fueling, so we have immediately to adapt a training session maybe for 2 days. So their body is able to fill up the glycogen stores again, right? Because that takes 1 or 2 days if you have done a big mistake there. If you don't have an honest communication, it goes to the wrong direction. Yeah. But as a coach, you don't know why. You haven't done any mistakes, basically, right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge challenge then.
Yeah, it's super challenging. Food intake, because it's really unique. As an age grouper, I finish a session sometimes, then I go back to my laptop, I start working, I'm like, oh no, I need to stick in my protein and eat something, and my carbs. So it's really hard sometimes, because it's not that you don't want to fuel, but just so much happening in life, and you're obviously not recovering super well. You have your next session, you feel tired.
But I can tell you, it's the same for the pros and as it is for you, right? It's a challenge, and I think from my point of view, you have to prepare it and to think about it like you prepare your swimming stuff or your running stuff, right? You need to think in advance. What was the content? What was the duration? What is approx energy demand? And then you may have to prepare it in advance to be ready afterwards.
Yeah, there was a funny video of Hayden Wild. He was doing T100, and then he did a race the next day. And then he came to the finish line and he won the T100 race. He had a bowl of food. And he immediately started eating because he was already recovering for the race tomorrow.
Yes.
So that shows,
Yes.
how quick we need to act for.
And there, I think you can learn from the pro cyclists. When you look at the TV, you see they crossing the finish line, and before any injury or whatever, they starting immediately by refueling, especially in GC. So like Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, it starts immediately. They already start in the last hour of a race, sometimes increasing the amount of energy.
Oh, interesting.
And there is a whole process starting at the moment the athlete has crossed the finish line by refueling it, because you can do some mistake on a one-day race or two or back-to-back race, but if you're doing a 3-week stage race, you come to a mistake, not one mistake, and you're gone, right? And on a smaller picture, it's the same for you
Yeah.
as well.
And do you think there's any way to know what is the right fuel for the right intensity if you don't have access to a lab? Is there like any general guidelines that you think are actually useful for people?
I think it can be really a challenge because your body does not always give you the honest feedback, or not only female but also male, they don't accept the feedback of their body for the demand of nutrition. So I think you need to have a really good feeling for your body to listen and to understand and to give him the demand of energy, what he deserves, right? And you have to accept to work with your body and not against your body, especially coming to your last questions, where maybe body weight is an issue, right? And especially the endurance athletes are mentally super strong. So there's no problem to be also strong in your head when it comes to energy intake. But then this would normally already the negative circle starts. Not once, but for several weeks, we can be in deep trouble after that.
And let's again move topic a bit. I would love to talk more about cycling and triathlon. And you have a background in cycling. How do you integrate cycling in training? And how do you train a triathlete to be a good cyclist and also to be able to run well off the bike?
So, as you said, cycling is probably the easiest way to build a safe foundation without risking any injuries. So we should use this possibility. And my strategy is to be very consistent on the bike volume, because as I said, beside fueling, which is important, we just talked about that, you can build this super solid foundation. You can even do recovery rides on the bike and having still a positive impact on your cardiovascular system. But beside that, I think it's important that, especially for the age group athletes, they don't only see a bike session as either a super easy coffee ride, which I like very much, to be honest, or on the other side, it's just a very hard, high-intensity session. There is a lot in between. There is a lot of happening in between, but a lot of athletes love to be on this side or on that side, or just be, this is maybe more typical male, always not easy, but not really hard. But they always tend to be on the same part of the intensity. And especially in cycling, there is a lot of variation you can add on. And then also you have to understand what's the demand of the performance race. Is it more intensity driven? Is it more strength oriented? And then of course we have to adapt that in training. And I think with the possibilities we have to combine indoor and outdoor session at the most places, I think we can build up some quite unique programs which normally fits into good performances.
later. And you just mentioned indoor and outdoor cycling, and I personally do a lot of indoor cycling on Swift. Mainly also because I often really have just 2 hours, and when you go outside, with preparing and the lights and everyone's often a bit longer. So I often do indoor riding. But I know it's better to do outdoor because that's the demands of the race. You're gonna ride outdoors. But what's your take on riding indoor versus outdoor? And maybe to add that, I also know from pros that there are pros that do a lot of indoor riding and mainly indoor riding there at the top level. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. It's interesting if you talk about the pro triathletes, they do a lot of session indoors, but if you talk about the pro cyclists, you can't find them easily. They normally don't like to ride indoors.
Always outdoors.
Yeah, it's different by culture, I would say. I wouldn't call one thing good and the other one bad. As you already mentioned, if you live in a city, right, and you already need 30 minutes to get out to have a proper power output, you're probably good on riding indoor, more session.
Have fun with that.
And riding when it's late in the evening, right, and all that. That makes a lot of sense. And quality is good on the turbo, right? Maybe Swift, it depends. Swift is a platform, right? A public platform which you have to pay, but there you may have to focus a little bit on managing the intensity because it's always a race. It's always a race on Swift, right? There's always somebody racing against you.
But I always use erg mode.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, good. I really think at the end of the day, it's taking the best of both sides. And as you said, in the end of the day, you have to perform outside. So if you go into the race, you have the crosswinds, you have the downhills, you have the transition zone where you have to do it on riding the bike with one hand, still some winds. It doesn't help you if you're just riding indoor. But we also do like very specific session, normally the high intensity session for safety reasons, indoor. And also depending on where the athlete is staying, it makes sense to also do endurance rides, longer rides indoor. But then it also comes to the personality of an athlete. I have one professional athlete. She probably would ride 5 hours on the turbo, no problems. No doubt.
Yeah, I can do
That's
that
fun.
too.
So, and as a coach, I think you can take that and then make the most out of it without doing all the sessions just on the turbo. But quality output will be good. You may have to focus a little bit more on nutrition, on fluids, on heart rate, probably is increasing because of temperatures and so on. But I have another pro athlete, and after 2 hours, she would texting me and saying, "What's wrong with me to give her 2 hours?" Right? She gets completely mad. And there also, I think we have to respect this athlete has no problem to go out for 3 hours ride on a rainy day.
Okay.
Which gives her good satisfaction and good technical skills, right? Handling the bike when it's raining, and the other ones are crashing immediately. So again, there are good reasons for both sides and taking the best out then, but I wouldn't call one good and one bad.
I would love to also ask you about cadence on the bike. So I'm not really a triathlete, but I do. This year I've been doing a lot of cycling as cross training, and I actually got quite into it, especially indoors. I have to say, I have to improve my bike handling skills. Anyway, I tend to have generally a pretty low cadence. Like, I don't know, maybe my very comfort zone is like high 60s, low 70s. Is this a problem?
It's not a problem until it's a problem. It's interesting when you look at science papers looking into cadence and how it correlates with oxygen uptake and performance. It's normally the cadence you feel the most comfortable, also the most efficient cadence. But from my experience, I can tell you to be in the low 60 probably is super, super low. It's already going to a endurance strength approach where we do, as I said, more endurance strength impact or high torque work. We're doing sessions even below that, but for me, probably this is super low for a average cadence.
Yeah.
So normally it's probably somewhere between 80 and 90. Can be also maybe a little bit below 80, but individually speaking, you have to look at how does the oxygen uptake changes at the same pace while you're changing the cadence, right? This is one thing, and the other also depends a little bit on your muscular buildup. So you are probably more a fast twitcher than a low twitcher. You are probably not now, from my experience looking at you, a female athlete who probably tends to have huge or puts big gear. So probably helps you to increase the cadence a little bit, going up to 70 and maybe 80. And it needs a little bit of time to do the motoric skills, the technique skills, the pedaling skills.
Yeah, it's also a skill, right?
It's a skill, right? And we are again in the same thing, like it needs time, right? But 60 probably is for an average cadence a little
Too low.
Too really low.
I knew it was a problem.
I keep telling her because I was like 80 to 90, someone said you can go a bit too under, but I thought it's pretty low. But then, I mean, there's also athletes, I think all red belt and athletes are low cadence people. And if you look at Alana Sifrit, for example, I think she's been talked about quite a bit. She rates very low cadence, like
Not really sure. If they do some specific sessions there, you see them. I'm not an expert for them, to be honest, but you see them doing a lot of low cadence work, which we quickly touched on. But in the race, you probably don't see them with a 60 average cadence because you don't have the gear for when you're riding 40 to 50 k's an hour, right? Then you need huge gears. But there are also studies out there showing that you lower your heart rate by lowering your cadence, but then it needs a different muscular stimulus. And if you don't have this muscular stimulus, or if you have built it up for several years, it doesn't fit for you. So coming back to that, if you feel comfortable with a cadence and it's somewhere in a normal range, whatever normal range is, I wouldn't call 60 the normal range, but what you said, probably 80, 90, even higher 90s, then you're fine if you feel comfortable with that.
Could it be my bike position?
Bike position also can have an impact, yeah. But again, 60 suits for me. I don't want to talk bad about you 60K.
But I do a lot of personal strength work, going sometimes 55 even, and then barely. It's really, my heart is very low, and it's really about getting the strength. And I only been doing those workouts since I changed my coach. Before, my coach never prescribed me a session. Now I've done it for a year, and I do feel so much stronger in my performance wins a lot. So I feel they're super important.
Super important, and normally that's why also we train a lot in the mountains, long climbs. That really gives you the specific strength you need on the bike. Similar like long runs uphill, right? Similar, or swimming with resistance. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, of course, if your body tolerates to the workload, if your structure's tolerating it, and if they don't,
You will know.
you will know, unfortunately, very quickly. Yeah.
Yes. I would love to talk more about some athletes that you coach. I want to start with Anne Reischmann, because she did Kona this year and posted that she was pregnant. So she still raised Kona, which is obviously extreme conditions, while being even in her first trimester. And I'm curious to learn from you how this was for you as a coach. How do you approach coaching a female athlete racing an Ironman with a baby?
I'm not an expert, It was my first time, so I can just tell you from this one-time experience, which was a huge learning process, of course. But first of all, I have to say it's super important that this is a very individual task. By doing this decision, we're going into that. And of course, in this case, we had great supports from the side, from the gynecologists, supporting us by giving us clear instruction what we should focus on. And when you when you look into the studies and the papers, there is not much papers on that topic. It also has probably changed in the recent years. So there was a lot of learning by doing, seeing how the body responds. And of course, especially with Annie, we had a very specific build-up going into a race, which was super demanding. Also, Annie tolerates a huge workload, but also a mental load. We follow a clear path, and we have done that very successfully. She won 2 Ironman, big races within the last 12 months. And then we have to switch from a very strict plan into more or less by feeling, to be honest. Of course, we were agree for a plan, we were writing it down, but we had to accept. And if you went through a pregnancy, you know that it can change from day to day. So many issues, right? So also I think she has to learn and to accept that you can plan, but you cannot transfer, even if you're mentally super strong and you do everything right. And that's a learning process, right? And that was a learning process for her environment. It was for her coaching stuff. We have several coaches, so she has a swim coach and she has a head coach from my side. So there was a lot of communication going on back and forth. And I think it was from her side a very strong performance going all the way until Hawaii. And I think she made it also now public, but like 4 days before departure from Zurich to Kona, she said, "No, I'm not going to race. I feel terrible."
Wow.
No,
I didn't know that.
But I think she made it also public. And also we agreed in the build-up, hey, if you have just 1% of time, we're not going to do it. We accept it. Pregnancy has the highest priority. So we had a long call, and she called me, I'm not going to go there. And I said, yeah, completely fine. We all expect. She already prepared to inform the partners and the sponsors and so on. Then we had a long chat. Again, relationship, right, building up for the years. And after that, she said, I'm going to go there.
Oh, really?
At least I'm going to take my bike to Hawaii. She said, I'm going to Hawaii, I'm doing my sponsoring demands, but I'm not going to race. So I'm not going to take my bike, so then I'm not getting into, for like I still want to race. And then she said, no, I'm going to take my bike. And then the pregnancy phase changed into kind of a good phase. There was less struggle, and she felt great. And she was asking me for an honest opinion if she can finish the race, and we defined some very clear guidelines. Again, together with the gynecologists we had to support us, since I'm not an expert and we had no other experts around us. And then normally she's racing always for high performance, of course, for the win or at least top performance. And then, yes, she really strongly switched her mindset in just she want to finish the race in a healthy way. But also in this race, there were several milestones where we agreed that she's going to drop the race, no matter what, if some specific numbers are increasing. Heart rate, core body temperature, feeling, whatever. And there was no bad feeling about that from our side, and the supporters were distributed that somebody could take her back. And this was a very, very special build-up, but also here, because of her strong foundation she have built up in the last couple of years, I think she did a super solid race, right? Of course, not being able to race for top 5 or top 10, but super solid performance.
Yeah, and she raced 9:30 something, right?
Something, I think 20. But then she also said in the last 10Ks, she could fight for it, but there was no reason, right? There was no reason to fight for a 20th place and to risk, but just want to finish it in a healthy way. And I think the result gave her right. And that was her way. And we truly expect and huge respect with the way she did that.
It's a really, really cool story. And also inspiring for women.
Yeah, I think we also have to accept that a female athlete can listen on her body and can also respect the feedback of her body. And a couple of years ago, females were working on the field very hard till the day before birth. And being pregnant is not a sickness, right? Every phase is different, every female is different, every pregnancy is different. But if everything goes wrong within a controlled environment, yeah, she showed it that it's possible. It works for her and maybe for other doesn't. So I think that's okay.
Yeah. I have another question about another athlete you coached, Imogen Simmonds, who was caught doping allegedly and then got cleared again, so she's free to race again, and you were coaching her. I don't want to dive too much into this topic, but I also don't want to ignore it. So do you have some things to say or some comments on this topic, and maybe how also this was for you as a coach to be in this situation?
Yes, I appreciate that you mention it, and I think there was a lot in the media about it. I think also a lot of headlines which are not fair, but just reduce it to one single act. And of course, if you dive a little bit deeper into the whole case, it's getting very quickly super complex. But for a coach, it's always a nightmare, right? Because again, we worked for 5 years. We had great success. She was podium 70.3 world. She was PTO podium. She had a huge, difficult hip injury. We went through that and came up to the highest level. But as I said, we do mainly remote coaching. So that means you can't control everything. You can't control what's going on behind hidden doors, and that was probably also her challenge, right? She was not able to control everything. In the end of the day, I know her as a person. I had so many experiences with her. One was when she came to Zurich. We tested in the lab, and like 2 times tests all out, athlete is completely done and dusted. So I offer her a fresh water and this PET bottle. I opened it and gave it to her, and she just mentioned, "Hey, but why is it open?" And I said, "Yeah, because I opened it for you, because you're now completely destroyed. So it's kind of a story." And she said, "Well, I have to be totally aware that it's clean, and I have to be so careful on that." She already had some kind of
Awareness.
More like
what was a
paranoia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I told her, "Well, don't worry, it's coming. It's safe. It's safe." And that's the way I was coaching her and learning how she works. Very, very specific on that. Very serious. Not just joking around with that. But then even on her side, there were some mistakes, right? And for her personally, I'm super happy that now she's, if I'm correct, she's totally free. I'm not sure there is another instance who can open the case again. And what she told me, she's not allowed to talk about now for 90 days until this last period is also over. But when you see also what it happens to a person, how deep a person can sink because of that, this is also what really hurts, of course, because there is always a human behind every mistake, even if it was a small mistake. And yeah, she was at a very, very dark place. So I'm super happy for her that she has now the chance, if she decides to come back, that she can make decision by herself and not other people making this decision for her.
Yeah, fully understandable. And I was to correct in the beginning, I said she was called doping, but it was more the substance that was if not allowed was identified in the blood, right? So that's more the correct way to say it than called doping. Because again, doping suggests an intent to do that. So
Absolutely, but in the end of the day, it was in her body, right? Also, if a super small doses, but it was in her body by her partner. So in the end of the day, it was her responsibility. And you also can try to control everything in your relationship, but it's the best example that you can't.
Yeah, and I mean, also you shouldn't, right? You should always be able to trust people, especially close to you, because you shouldn't be controlling. You just trust the person, right?
I think you have to trust your next environment. And I don't want to talk now about public things from her relationship, but for me, it's absolutely clear sign that she didn't have any ideas when what's happened with the relationship, but this is completely private. And, so I think she was very clear in how she handled private affairs after that, and that's for me a very clear statement.
Yeah,
from her side.
Yeah. Appreciate the transparency. It's nice to have an open conversation about the topic.
Absolutely.
And sorry, that must have been really hard for you and for her.
I think it was hard for everybody involved, but for her it was the worst, right?
Yeah.
And that's maybe also what people have to think about when they talk about the others, right? There is always a human behind it, unless case is super clear. You have to be a little bit careful what you're talking about. And what,
I personally would love if she goes back and then, facing also maybe the people that were bullshitting at her, and then you kind of stand up, and then maybe people are not voting as much when the person's actually there.
Yeah.
It's always easy to do that on comments
on social media especially, and not standing in the front and diving deep into it and understand all the details. But again, for sure there were mistakes, and she paid a very high price for that kind of mistake. It's not that she's now completely out of it. So
All right. We're moving to the closing, getting to the end of the episode. We want to ask you about advice for others, which is something we always do here at Human Endurance. So you've qualified athletes for Kona over 20 times, unless my numbers are wrong.
we have more than 20.
More than 20.
Yeah,
Perfect.
That's
So more than 20 athletes have gone to Kona. You've coached world champions, worked with busy professionals, so kind of, lots of different types of athletes. And achieved huge success. What is one piece of advice that you would like to share with listeners that, regardless of their level, would still apply to them?
We talk about many different topics now, but one of the most important that is very simple. You need to love what you do, and it has to come deep from your heart. And it doesn't matter if you're a pro athlete or an age group athlete, or just we, as an example, 3 times going walking for 30 minutes in the fresh air and feeling much better. I think if it comes from deep inside and you have fun by what you're doing, you appreciate what you can or you're able to do, this is the most important. And if you're losing this passion, all the details you may know about nutrition and body composition and training, it doesn't help at all anymore. So I think that's the most important. And having this fire inside as long as possible, that's most important.
Yeah, and from talking to you, I can definitely feel that we still have this passion.
Thank you very much.
And the final question is there a question that you would have liked to have that we haven't asked?
I think you had a lot of very good questions, so I'm not missing a specific one. No.
Cool.
That's good, I think.
And then I have one last thing for you. If listeners want to find you, maybe they want to be coached by you, maybe they want to learn more about you, where can they reach you? Where should they go?
Unfortunately, I'm very bad on social media and stuff. My job is not to be on social media, but you can find me on social media with my name. And if I'm going into social media, I will also answer it, of course, and then we can connect.
It was super nice having you on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Human Endurance. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you like the show,
Don't forget to rate it and hit the subscribe button whatever you're listening to it. This helps us to reach a bigger audience. Thank you and see you next time.